Support for Carolina Business Review provided by Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, where healthcare is changing for the better. Find out how at ahealthysc.tv. And by Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services, with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
It is an interesting moment in the Carolinas' history. Not to overstate it, but we sit at an inflection point between an unprecedented presidential contest, local and state public policy debates, and whether or not the steam in this economic expansion is dissipating. Thank you for supporting the most widely watched and the longest-running source of Carolina business and public policy, seen each week across the Carolinas for the last 25 years. This time on our program, Mac Bennett of the United Way of the Midlands, Dave Heinen of the North Carolina Center for Nonprofits, and later on, Cabinet Secretary Susan Kluttz.
Major funding also by Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care when and where you need it. The Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. And by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join us and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. On this edition of Carolina Business Review, David Heinen from the North Carolina Center for Nonprofits, Mac Bennett of the United Way of the Midlands, and special guest Susan Kluttz, Secretary of the North Carolina Department of Natural and Cultural Resources.
Hello, welcome to our program. David, Mac, good to have you both here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
David, let's start with something here. As we close in on elections, the political pitch, the tone, has certainly kind of mirrored what the presidential campaign looks like, which is pretty amazing. What is, or not pretty amazing, I guess, in your point of view, what is the not-for-profits role in, and these are my words, but what should not-for-profits be doing in brokering an honest dialogue about the true issues and not the personality faults? Or, I mean, how can we get to the nuggets of the things that really are policy and are important?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Charitable nonprofits, of course, are required by law to be nonpartisan, which means they can't oppose or support candidates or coordinate their activities with political parties or candidates. What they can do, though, is really engage in the policy dialogue and also just engage in getting people registered to vote and actually voting in a way that's separate from any of the rhetoric that's going on in the political discourse. So they can bring up the policy issues, and there are a variety of ways they can do that. So, for example, we at the North Carolina Center for Nonprofits have done a candidate questionnaire that's nonpartisan. We've sent it to every candidate for statewide office and for state legislative offices in the state. A lot of nonprofits are doing voter registration work. There's research out there from Nonprofit Vote, a national organization, that shows that across every demographic breakdown that voter turnout is higher if somebody's been contacted in a nonpartisan way by a nonprofit. And it's really important because both of the parties are often not reaching out to some of the people who are served by nonprofits. So we know that 1 out of every 6 eligible voters has a disability. Neither political party is really focusing their outreach efforts on people with disabilities, low-income people, people of color, elderly North Carolinians, parents, young voters are all people who are disproportionately served by nonprofits. Nonprofits are really trusted by them, and if the nonprofit in a nonpartisan way is getting them to register to vote, make sure they're registered where they live currently, and then doing things to help them actually get out to vote, whether it's a church providing them a ride to the polls, whether it is a human service provider, just reminding them of where they can find their early voting or their election day precinct. So it makes a huge difference.
So this is almost as tactical as it is strategic. David, I'm sorry, Mac, you're nodding in agreement over there. Is that because you're doing the same thing, or you just agree with?
Well, no, I agree. We need to avoid being caught up in the personalities around the races and really focus on what some of the issues are associated with the people we serve, and really avoiding the personalities.
So here's the thing, gentlemen. How do you cut in North Carolina, David? I hear you talking about voter registration and helping that. It's a very acute, tender issue about voter ID and what the Supreme Court has said about voter ID. So how do you kind of go down that track and not end up being embroiled in that, and then lose street cred as a nonprofit?
Right. Well, so my feeling and what the center has done is just recognizing, hey, here's what the law is, and before the Supreme Court, before the court decision, and before when voter ID was in effect, we try to give nonprofits the resources to make sure that the people who they're serving, who often don't have a driver's license, knew here's what you needed to do. When that changed after the court decision, we've tried to give nonprofits the resources to be able to say, again, here's what we're not really making a judgment on what that law, and that there may be good reasons for and against voter ID and some of the other election law changes, but here's what it is. And ultimately, we just want to make sure that everybody who's eligible to vote is registered and then actually votes and isn't afraid to vote, doesn't feel like, all right, I don't have a driver's license, maybe I shouldn't bother to go. Maybe with some of the other changes, there's going to be a really long line, or there's going to be difficulty voting. But just being that kind of reassuring voice, and again, kind of getting away from the rhetoric and keeping it more neutral and making it seem safer and just something that everybody can do.
Mac, can you go ahead?
Well, I do think we're going to be challenged this year because I think a lot of people are checking out of the presidential election. I think people are losing interest in the candidates that we have. So it's going to make it more difficult on some of the local issues and the local candidates to really get a good response from the voters.
So you think the hangover from whatever the presidential politics will end up in local elections like Richland County, Lexington, City of Columbia?
Absolutely. So
how do, as David describes this participation as nonprofits try to lead the effort and pull citizens into the debate, has it been harder, and Mac, I'm looking at you, has it been harder to have leadership and to bring folks back into the debate around the policy that does matter when the electorate is becoming, I wouldn't even say skeptical, I would say cynical?
Yeah, I think we're becoming very, we're setting our boundaries. People are far apart. It's hard to get people together to talk, and I think we've got some very strong personalities that are creating the issues on the fringes, and I think that's hurting conversation to ability to take place in our communities.
David, can we even look past the first Tuesday in November now for issues that are going to be important? Education, transportation, so on and so forth. Is there something that you put a flag in the ground to say, come heck or high water, after that election date in November, this has got to be job one?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that there are some things that as Max said, are just so polarized that it's hard to do that. But from the nonprofit sector's perspective, I think that we look at it that we've been challenged for resources, both as far as the nonprofits that are providing a lot of services to the public through government grants and contracts, have seen those the funding for those contracts go down, have seen the red tape for those go up. And every nonprofit has seen that the tax exemption is challenged, whether it's sales tax refunds in North Carolina, property tax exemption across the country. Almost every state is seeing disparate challenges to nonprofit property tax exemption. That makes a real difference for those nonprofit service providers. And those are things that aren't necessarily partisan issues. So I don't know that the election is going to, the outcome of not just the presidential election, but probably more importantly, state elections, local elections, is going to make a difference, because those are driven more by the economy and by, ultimately those are kind of outside factors. So we as a sector have really driven a stake, and we really need to protect our tax exemption. That's really part of that social compact that has been, throughout the history of our country, essential to the nonprofit sector.
So, Mac, is that tax exemption for nonprofits, is that a real risk? Is that a bugaboo at night for nonprofits?
We don't have that much conversation about that in South Carolina at this point. Obviously, in Columbia, where half of the property is nonprofit, university, or state-owned, not paying local property taxes, it is a problem, and I think eventually we're going to get into that. But I think more important for us on a statewide basis is tax reform. We've got a huge tax problem with what is charged taxes, sales tax, other types of taxes. We passed Senate Bill 388 several years ago. It's been a disaster.
That moved a lot of the tax burden onto businesses for education.
Right.
Yeah.
And the district, and then you add into that, we've got the disparate funding between districts, school districts across the state, and we've had a lawsuit over that. So we've got a lot of issues around who's paying taxes and where those taxes are going that at some point our state legislature is going to have to address.
Just a quick follow-up with you, Mac, and we're going to bring our guest on. So does what the General Assembly in North Carolina over the last 2 or 3 years around tax reform, around tax cuts, both corporate and personal, you think that emboldens the State House to be more strident in holding the feet to the fire for all the legislators around having tax reform?
I really don't. I think I think they operate in different spheres, local versus what happens at the. We still struggle with local where the power base is in our local government, and we've got senators and House members that still want control of what happens at the county level. So it's a real. Yeah. It's still divided in South Carolina, very much divided.
Gentlemen, thank you. Stay with us. We're going to meet our guests in just a moment. Next week on this program, we've talked about corporate tax, personal tax. We've talked about tax reform. We'll have 2 authors and architects of some serious legislation in North Carolina, and they are in leadership. One is Senator Bob Rucho from Mecklenburg County and surrounding area in the Piedmont, and the other is the leader in the Senate. Senate Pro Tem Phil Berger would be our guest as well next week. We hope you'll join us. Our guest comes from a lineage of familial mayors. She was the longest-serving mayor of Salisbury, North Carolina, succeeding Margaret Kluttz, not an immediate relation, and her father, former Mayor John Ware, who encouraged her to seek the office as well. She is now the Secretary of the North Carolina of Natural and Cultural Resources, still getting used to that extended name. We welcome the Honorable Susan Kluttz. Madam Secretary, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, absolutely.
Happy to be here.
Welcome back to the Southern Piedmont to come tape this program.
Absolutely. Nice to come home.
So let me just start with this easy question. Race relations.
Right.
And I still call you Mayor, Madam Secretary. I hope you don't mind that, but you were the longest serving mayor in Salisbury. And one of the stakes in the ground, one of your big initiatives was race relations.
It was.
Your Honor, when you have, like a lot of us, have watched what happened in Charlotte around race relations, around tragedy, this old acute debate that we've had around relations, again, has been brought to the fore. Do we need to be thinking about race relations differently now?
I just think, I'm disappointed that that continues to be a problem. I felt like when I came in to be mayor in 1997 in Salisbury, and was optimistic that everything that we did, that things would change and everything would be so much better. So I'm sad that we still are focusing on that, but there's no question we have to always continue. In Salisbury, and actually when I came into office, I did not realize there was a perception of racism in our police department at the time. And I already was focused on thinking that we were not doing enough for black-white issues in Salisbury, just like anywhere else in the United States. But we immediately implemented diversity training for our city employees, for all of our city employees. We felt that we didn't want people ever offending anyone, but especially if they didn't understand how they were offending them. So we started that, and then we worked with our Human Relations Council we called in the 100 top businesses in Salisbury and Rowan County to come in to see if they would be interested in bringing the program to their businesses. We did that. That was very successful, and then we took it to the faith community. We actually won a national award for our efforts for that. And really, the whole 14 years, we continued to do that. But it's just something that you never can stop working for.
Do you feel like, and this is at all not meant as disrespect, do you think there was there is yet another step to go. In other words, people of color will say, well, you know, a lot of that can be window dressing, but it goes much deeper than that. It has to do with respect. It has to do with help and support. Yeah. Is there another 2 or 3 or 7 steps that we need to take around this?
I think there are. Like I said, I don't know. I don't have the answer, but I think you need to continue to look for what is the answer. What can help and what can make things better. And you always need to be looking for a way to improve wherever you are, whether it's Charlotte or North Carolina or anywhere. Mm-hmm.
David, question?
I do.
Yeah, so kind of shifting the gears to your current role as secretary.
Yes.
I know that the 2 departments have merged, or that you've taken on natural resources. And how's that shifted what your role has been, and kind of how you've looked at the different parts of the economy that you've gotten, the larger part of the economy now that is under one department, and the commonalities?
Well, it's been very interesting. When Governor McCrory appointed me when he was elected in 2012 to be secretary of what was then just cultural resources, which was huge, arts, history, and libraries. And he said that he wanted me to focus particularly this department on economic development, job creation, tourism, and education. And we worked very hard for 3 years doing that. And I was very proud to be able to assemble a very strong team. I made sure that we brought business and business thinking into the department to look for efficiencies particularly. We were a critically underfunded department, and we were about to have to close some of our historic sites at the time. So we had to, you know, work very hard to do that. But after 3 years of that, Governor McCrory recommended that natural resources should move out of Diener and move in with us as well. And so that was quite a challenge, because that more than doubled our department. And it might sound easy to move a division or divisions of state government from one department to another. It is very complicated, and particularly with budget, human resources, and just budget code. I mean, you just wouldn't believe what's been involved, but it's been a year now. He recommended it, and then the legislature enthusiastically agreed. And as a matter of fact, they even gave us more than he had recommended. He had recommended the zoo and science museums, state parks, and the aquariums. And they said that, you know, they were very enthusiastic and said, you know, why don't you take more? And so we got Clean Water Management Trust Fund, we got the Natural Heritage Program, we just got so much. And then they looked at maybe 6 more, the legislature looked at maybe 6 more things that they wanted us to study that we should take, but at that point, you know, we had our hands full. But we're thrilled because natural and cultural resources are so similar. We consider both to be the state treasures. And we have so much in common. We support them. We have private groups that, of course, we depend on. And so we have brought them all together, and it makes such sense, really. I think it had been talked about for a long time, but it hadn't been done before. I think the time was right because of the strong team we had in place. But, you know, we have wonderful plans now. It's taken us a year to get through the details, but we have wonderful plans to cross-market not only our museums and sites together, but also regionally. We've divided the state up into 7 regions. I've been to all 7 regions to introduce people who were in different departments and had never even sometimes met each other. So it's very exciting what we have and what we have to look forward to.
So can South Carolina learn? We still have a separate Department of Natural Resources and Arts Commission.
Really?
And the Arts Commission struggles for funding from state government. So can we learn from what you've done in North Carolina?
Well, we would love to show off what we've done. We're very proud of it. And actually, I've been so excited. I'm thrilled to work for a governor who understands the importance of arts and has from the beginning. And when I was appointed, he said, you know, I know this is so important to the state. I know it's critically underfunded, and you know that's just unacceptable. And so our funding has increased both in cultural and natural, and we just see a whole lot of support and from the legislature as well. And we're very proud of what's happened and the improvements we've made.
So combining the two make a lot of sense, and as you describe it, Madam Secretary, so you've got as you described it, the treasures of North Carolina,
we do.
Which is interesting. It's the heart and soul of the old North State, the Tar Heel State. How, and again, this is not the easiest question, but I think you can handle it. So how do you take, that's not the right way to preface it.
I'll try.
So how do you take what the treasure of North Carolina, and when you hear and see the debate around HB2 or voter ID, and you're concerned about the brand. What, as the leadership of the cultural and natural resources, what would your role be to say, wait a minute, here's what the dialogue needs to be?
Right. Well, you know, anytime something comes up like this that hurts the state, the governor, all of us are very, very concerned and hurt about that. But, you know, we have so much going on in state government. We're doing so many things. I've always said I have the best department in state government with cultural resources, and now it's even better with natural. But we have got so much going on every day in not only my department with wonderful things that are happening, but also with the whole administration. The governor requires us to meet every single week. Our cabinet meets. We have from the very first hour. And he goes around the room and he expects every cabinet secretary to report every single week on what you have done, what is happening in your department to make it better, more efficient, and to improve it. And so I get to hear that. It's very exciting to be in on that conversation and see that there's so many other things going on. You know, HB2 is a law, but just like any other law, my department works under that. We have such quality people, and we continue to provide the very best quality service. And we're very excited that visitation in the last year has risen in our department overall over 7%. The parks by 2 million people. We're very thrilled about what we see. We're so happy about the bond referendum that was successful. That began as a idea of the governor's. And of course, I was thrilled that parks and the zoo were included. Parks ended up getting $75 million and the zoo $25 million. We certainly need it. It's not everything we need, but it's a great jump start from the recession and from how we had been so critically cut in both departments.
David?
Yeah, and you've talked about in the cabinet meetings. You talk about different ideas and things that are happening in different parts of state government to make it more efficient and to do things in new ways. What are a couple of the creative things you've seen from other departments? I know you've had a lot of different faces in the last 4 years in those cabinet meetings. That are some really innovative things that other parts of state government are doing.
Well, from Commerce, 300,000 jobs have been created since we've been there. In the Department of Transportation, the first thing that happened was the governor had put together a 25-year strategic plan for transportation, which has totally changed it. That was a frustration when I was mayor and working with the Metropolitan Mayors Coalition, was the equity formula really wasn't equitable. And so, that got straightened out. That's very exciting. In education, the focus that the governor's put on education and teacher pay, it's just, as I said, it's exciting every day just to hear good things that are happening and wonderful state employees. I just attended an award ceremony for the top state employees awards last week, and to hear incredible things that they do above and beyond their jobs is very exciting to me.
Mac, we've got about a minute left.
More about funding into the future. I know in South Carolina we're putting more fees on users. Is that the way North Carolina is going as well?
At this point, not really so much. The governor feels very strongly he wants to keep our state parks free, our museums, a lot of things, the basic visit free, and then add costs. Sometimes we do that with programs. But we are looking at different ways that possibly the Arts Council can figure out to come up with more revenue. We always are looking for more revenue. And of course, we support all arts councils throughout North Carolina, in addition to all libraries. And we're always looking for more funding. We never have enough.
Well, and literally, we've got about 45 seconds left. It would seem like some of the low-hanging fruit could be at least a small fee in the parks. Wouldn't that be relatively painless for a lot of folks? Wouldn't that be not as...
We continue to study that. So, but we, as I said, we want to give as much back to the citizens of North Carolina as we can, and I'm just very proud of to be a part and grateful to the governor for letting me be a part of such a wonderful department.
Mayor, Your Honor,
That's fine.
Madam Secretary, well, we certainly will show more respect to you and to the office for that. Thank you for being on the program. I think Governor McCrory is fortunate to have you, not just as the only Democrat in the cabinet, but also clearly someone that believes in what's going on in the state. But thank you. Please come back.
Thank you for having me, Chris.
Thank you. Mac, good to see you. Good luck down there in Lexington and Richland counties. Always interesting times.
Yeah, that's right.
David, good to see you. Thanks for being on the
Thank you,
program.
Chris.
Thank you. Thank you for watching our program. Until next week, I'm Chris William. Hope your weekend is good. Good night.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review was provided by the Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join us and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care, when and where you need it. Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services, with more than 300 operations in 35 countries. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, where healthcare is changing for the better. Find out how at ahealthysc.tv. And by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.org.